The 9 Steps to Overcoming Negative Patterns and Shame. In the introductory video, I discussed the victim-hero-villain complex and how, starting in early childhood, it keeps us stuck repeating negative patterns. I've developed 9 steps to overcome these negative patterns and shame to reclaim your life. These steps can be utilized by anyone. Step 1. Admit you're carrying shame that you've been avoiding. Almost everyone carries shame. Some overcome it, but many remain imprisoned by it, yet are completely unaware of their own imprisonment. They remain outward focused while shame eats away at them internally. Shame typically manifests in early childhood by internalizing negative things we do not fully understand. Internalizing these qualities takes all the pressure off our parental figures so they remain in good standing. We often view our parents and other authority figures as all-knowing. Our parental figures are our primary mode of survival. When they get upset at us, we instinctively blame ourselves regardless of if we deserve blame. Yet when we identify ourselves as being unlovable, a mistake, a bad person, and other things we may associate with ourselves, we form the idea that at our most authentic level, we are wrong. If our authentic selves are wrong, then we must hide this authenticity in exchange for an idea image that is acceptable. Yet the shame we hide does not go away. It remains hidden within our unconscious, operating as a puppet master pulling our strings. The idea images we portray at the surface are extensions of this shame, and therefore create toxic patterns I call negative shame cycles. These cycles repeat themselves in our everyday lives, but we are blind to their unconscious origins. Instead, we blame our environment, which further perpetuates the cycle. By admitting we possess this shame, we have turned our focus inward. This is the first step in our transformation. Many steps can be applied simultaneously and even out of order, but this has to be the first step. If you cannot admit you possess shame that you've been avoiding, the rest of this becomes meaningless. Shame is the foundation that greases the wheels of negative life patterns and feeling stuck. Step 2. Identify and list the repeating negative patterns in your life. List the negative patterns in your life that repeat themselves despite wanting something new. Maybe you want a good relationship, but always attract relationships that start great but end up toxic and broken. Maybe you feel like you're constantly surrounded by drama and confrontation despite wanting nothing to do with it. It could be that you're trying to lose weight, yet continue gaining weight, or that you cannot lose weight for very long before gaining it back. Maybe you are looking to change careers or move up within your current career, but you remain stuck in the everyday rut of your current position. Maybe you're fighting an addiction and failing to overcome it. List every example of a negative life pattern that you want to change but feel unable to. Step 3. Apply the victim-hero-villain complex to your list of negative repeating patterns. As discussed in our introduction video, the victim-hero-villain complex is a set of unconscious defense mechanisms we use to mask our shame. These 3 roles exist within us. They immediately engage in an unconscious inner conflict anytime something occurs in our lives that reflects the shame we've buried. They serve to protect it from being exposed, but this ultimately fails. As young children, we learn that certain things we do upset our parents. We bury these parts of ourselves, and when something occurs that triggers these buried parts, we wear the surface mask of a victim or a hero. We either play the victim by making excuses and claiming we are innocent and powerless, or we play the hero by focusing on fixing others and their situations. This keeps us in good standing. Yet the victim and hero surface masks we wear are extensions of our unconscious shame. Therefore, there will be times we mess up despite playing the victim, and there will be times we fail to fix someone's situation despite playing the hero. When these 2 roles can no longer hide our shame, we begin feeling vulnerable. Our inner villain arises as a last-ditch effort to keep our shame hidden, tearing others down to build ourselves up. Yet we rationalize our villainous behavior by manipulating ourselves with the surface victim and hero roles. We either play the victim by saying we had no choice but to lash out because we are tired of being controlled, disrespected, and walked all over. Or we play the hero, claiming we are unappreciated, taken for granted, and not listened to. This keeps our shame hidden. Understanding these defense mechanisms, look at your list of negative patterns and think about the reasons you usually give for why you keep experiencing them. Deeply contemplate each negative pattern. Give yourself as much time as you need. Do you notice yourself rationalizing why it's not your fault? Do you keep focusing on blaming someone or something else? Are you making excuses for yourself? Which defense mechanisms involving the victim, hero, and villain roles do you observe? What are these defense mechanisms hiding? Can you trace these reactions back to negative thoughts about yourself that you've internalized? You will know if you've uncovered your shame because it will trigger a strong thought and emotion that's been lying dormant yet waiting to be seen. The more you accept and remain present with this thought and emotion instead of hiding from it, the more you will see it does not define you. Step 4. List your daily triggers. There are moments in your everyday life where you get triggered. You get triggered when you react instantly and become defensive. Don't worry, we all do it, but most of us react by rationalizing why we become triggered instead of investigating the underlying origin of the trigger itself. We replay the scenario over repeatedly in our minds to convince ourselves we are in the right. When we do this, we often try to convince ourselves we are a victim, or that we are in a position to tell others they are wrong and how they need to fix it. Yet, would you be repeatedly replaying this scenario in your mind if you knew you were in the right? Of course not. When we replay the scenario, it is because a part of us knows we have done something to trigger that same feeling from our past that created shame. Yet that inner knowing is a mere whisper to the victim-hero-villain complex working overtime to convince us not to look any deeper than the surface. Observe when you're triggered and replay the scenario in your mind. Listen to this whisper to see what it reveals. Like step 3, you will know when you've revealed the underlying shame when these old yet familiar thoughts and emotions arise. Step 5. Embrace vulnerability. Feeling vulnerable by choice is not comfortable, but it is the antidote to shame. We avoid shame by doing things like fantasizing about pleasant scenarios or doing mindless activities as a distraction. We may tear others down that reflect our shame, or deny that we make mistakes or should feel any sense of guilt. These things protect us from feeling vulnerable, yet destroy us from the inside. We lack empathy and compassion as we become hardened, selfish, and manipulative. The temporary gratification of avoiding our shame is far overshadowed by the long-term damage of repeating negative patterns and forming toxic relationships with our closest peers. Shame needs room to breathe for you to become free of its unconscious grip on your life. It is by admitting our fears, limitations, and mistakes while embracing our moments of vulnerability that we give shame the appropriate space it needs. Journaling, meditation, and opening up to others are great exercises for embracing vulnerability. Step 6. Be willing to admit your mistakes and accept that all of us have imperfections. That perfect image you had of your parental figures as a young child, it never existed. You may understand this now, but have you understood this within yourself? Have you accepted that you can make mistakes without being a mistake? That you can fail without being a failure? That you can be mistreated yet still be worthy of respect? Our mistakes and guilt do not have to define us. We can admit them as they occur and work on improving. When we face our mistakes, we become more open to all aspects of ourselves, not just the ones we were conditioned to believe were socially acceptable. We can stop worshiping people we believe are mistake-free. They also make mistakes. We can see everyone has imperfections and stop holding ourselves and others to a standard that is impossible to meet. This allows us to be more compassionate and empathetic instead of dismissive and distant. Step 7. Make amends for your past mistakes and forgive others for theirs. Sincerely making amends can only occur when who you are today is no longer defined by who you used to be. In other words, you see the person you believed you were at that time and realize that is no longer how you define yourself. Making amends frees you from your bondage to that past. It doesn't excuse what you've done, and the people you make amends with may or may not forgive you, but you cannot control their reaction. You can only sincerely apologize and work to do better in the present and future. Likewise, forgiving others for what they've done to you does not excuse, condone, or support what may have occurred in the past. Forgiveness is about allowing yourself to release the bondage of resentment and bitterness so it no longer weighs you down. It also allows someone else to move on that may be harboring shame related to what they did to you. Step 8. Become more responsible. When we see the victim-hero-villain complex for what it is and directly address our shame, we will see responsibility in a different way. While bad things may happen to us of no fault of our own, we are still responsible for picking up the broken pieces. Blaming others, even if they are at fault, does nothing to change the situation. It keeps us stuck. Likewise, it means that we are not responsible for fixing other people. We can become a guide to people who are open and willing to seek our advice, but we are not responsible for if they take our advice. Also, fixing every problem for someone else so they do not have to do it enables them to depend on us to fix everything. Yet we can't fix everything. A more responsible person empowers others by giving them tools so they can use them to do the work themselves. Beyond that, the responsibility falls on the other person to do the work. Conversely, it is okay to admit when we do not have all the answers and ask others for help. It can feel vulnerable, and that's okay, but we still are the ones responsible for fixing our own issues, even if someone else is guiding us along the way. Blaming their guidance or lack thereof does not relieve us of responsibility to fix whatever the situation is we find ourselves in. Finally, we cannot expect others to change for us. When it's possible, we can change the situation and people we surround ourselves with. If we continue finding ourselves surrounded by people we think should be changing for us, it's probably us that needs to change. Step 9. Redefine the victim-hero-villain complex. Overcoming shame and making peace with it allows us to move beyond the unconscious internal conflict of the victim-hero-villain complex. Once our shame is released, the cyclical pattern of negativity and self-destruction can be transformed into a cyclical pattern that enables us to overcome struggle. When they are revolved around shame, the three internal roles are at conflict. Once the shame is overcome, the three roles become balanced by each other. Instead of feeling powerless, our inner victim becomes empowered yet keeps its vulnerability. In turn, our inner villain becomes compassionate by allowing itself to feel vulnerable, yet it still remains its sense of assertiveness and establishes healthy boundaries as needed. Likewise, our inner hero feels comfortable admitting its limitations and remaining humble, seeking guidance as needed while still being available to guide others. These three inner aspects become one. This is the authentic self. At times we will be able to guide others, at other times we will need others to guide us, and sometimes we will need to stand up for ourselves and establish boundaries, yet hold no grudges. Mistakes and unfortunate circumstances will still occur. We will laugh and we will cry. We will experience milestones and we will experience hardships. But throughout it all, we will remain empowered by admitting mistakes, taking responsibility for our own lives, and feeling content with expressing our authenticity. In future videos, I will individually break down each step one by one in more detail. And as always, until next time, keep growing.